Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian here at the Heritage Foundation think tank in Washington, D.C. at the conclusion of a tremendous event on the trade tensions between Japan and South Korea. And it's my honor to be talking to Bruce Klingner, one of the nation's true great experts on Asia, but specifically also on North Korea. I want to get to the broader conversation about the Japan-Korea trade dispute, but first start off with North Korea's stream of provocative actions as we've seen. I think that there was a sense by many that there would be a calming of tensions, obviously, in the wake of the conversations that Kim Jong-un has had with President Trump, including a second meeting without any conditions tied to it. Talk to us about these missile launches and what do they tell us about what's to come in this relationship that you and I are going to be discussing for the next few decades.
Right. Well, North Korea has committed at least 8 violations of UN resolutions this year with a missile called the KN-23, which is based on a Russian Iskander missile. So they're violations. And then they've also conducted launches of multiple rocket launchers, which may also be additional violations. Now, the international community has never responded very strongly to short-range ballistic missile violations. There's sort of a hierarchy where we respond most strongly to nuclear or ICBM tests. That said, the U.S. administration has been very cavalier in just dismissing these violations as unimportant. And that's the wrong action. We can not necessarily go to the UN for additional resolutions, but first of all, we can declare that they are violations, that we are displeased with this kind of activity. It certainly calls into question Kim Jong-un's commitment to denuclearization and his other pledges, and that we could also announce that this could cause the U.S. to reconsider its self-imposed restraint on enforcing our own laws. As President Trump said a year ago, there are 300 North Korean entities we're not sanctioning, even though they're violating U.S. law in the U.S. financial system. And also we could declare we are going to reconsider our self-imposed ban on what has been a cancellation of 12 military exercises so far.
And how do you think, more broadly, what's the next step for this, right? I mean, if Washington's the one who's always been driving this bus, whether it's to assemble an international coalition, whether it's to bring Europeans in, as the Bush administration did, the Obama administration ratcheted up sanctions as well, and yet, without the United States saying, like, hey, this is a problem, how does this actually not get worse? Because the North Koreans have been one regime that have always taken advantage of that legroom to try to make another provocation, especially now when Japan and South Korea, 2 absolutely critical U.S. allies in the region that would be valuable in trying to put the North Koreans back in a box, are actually at each other's throats.
Yeah, it's always very tenuous on the Korean Peninsula, and there's no magic solution. People will argue whether more sanctions over the years or stronger diplomacy would have prevented us from being where we are today. But we tried the best we can. I think if we have a comprehensive, integrated strategy using all the instruments of national power, it's more likely to succeed than relying or over-relying on one tool over the other. So it's not a question of do you do diplomacy or sanctions. You need both, along with deterrence and other tools. So, we have been pulling our punches on enforcing our own laws and UN resolutions. The U.S. has been trying to engage in diplomacy, not only under the Trump administration, but preceding administrations. And, not only is North Korea now refusing to meet with Steve Norper, the special envoy, if you talk to his predecessors, they would say they wouldn't meet with me either. So right now people are blaming the U.S. for having military exercises, even though North Korea has not curtailed their own exercises. We didn't get any kind of reciprocal action for canceling numerous military exercises. And North Korea is the one refusing to having diplomatic relations.
Let's go to the topic of the conference, obviously the Japan-South Korea trade dispute. A lot of passionate feelings on both sides. From a Japanese perspective, their sense is Korea started this with a lock-on incident and a couple of other moves that has frustrated South Korea, as we heard Jim Schaaf, a man who you did spend a lot of time on this issue. It seems like both have concluded that strategically they don't need the other as much or are willing to bear the pain of damaging that strategic relationship. From your standpoint, Where are we? What's next? And what should the United States be doing, given that the United States in the past was quite aggressive in deploying some of the senior-most people over to the region to try to get both sides to talk to each other?
It's a very difficult issue because it really has the basis in the historic dispute between Korea and Japan, not only from the Japanese occupation of the peninsula during 1910 and 1945, but it really goes back to centuries of invasions. So it's perhaps unsolvable, but in the past, when we've had sort of these disputes that have really been triggered by historic issues, we've been able to at least move the issue out of the spotlight and onto the back burner. So, what often both Japanese and Koreans will come to the U.S. saying, pick my side 100%. And the U.S. really sees a lot of fault on both sides. So the Japanese export controls seem out of proportion with the concerns that Tokyo has declared they have. And then clearly the South Korean pulling out of the Comfort Women Agreement and the Supreme Court ruling against Japanese firms was not appreciated by Washington. Moving forward, I do think the U.S. has to be involved. We don't want to be a public arbiter or judge between the two countries, but we do need, I think, more, energetic involvement. We understand that the Obama administration was involved behind the scenes, giving very stern messages to both Japan and South Korea, which led, at least in part, to the Comfort Women Agreement of 2015. I think we need to emulate that and have a less hands-off approach, which is what the Trump administration seems to be doing so far.
I remember at the time, and I think you wisely noted it, how both sides would complain about, well, we got really beaten up, and then you talk to the other side, and they got really beaten up too. I mean, the whole idea was everybody was mutually being beaten up, which isn't necessarily the way to do this. But as you said, this is a lot deeper than comfort women at the end of the day. Let me ask you one last question, and that's about the joint air patrols Russia and China conducted. Very, very cleverly played. South Korea, obviously with a neighbor like North Korea, responded, I think, very aggressively. I think most people would say 800 rounds fired against airplanes is pretty robust of a message. But the U.S. response was a little bit tepid, folks thought. Talk to us about how a Russian-China axis in this region changes the dynamic, and how the United States and its allies have to respond to it, given that these provocations, it's not accidental that they picked this specific thing, contested islands, that South Korea would respond to, and that Japan would more vociferously respond to South Korea's response than it did to the original action.
Right. Well, there's a lot going on there. We know China has done a lot of incursions into Japanese air defense zones and also South Korean. I'm not aware of Russian incursions. I just don't know. But having a joint Russian-Chinese air incursion into not only the air defense zones, but over the disputed islands of Tokto or Takashima, as they're called by the two countries, certainly was a way of trying to, I think, exacerbate the wound right now which exists between South Korea and Japan. So it was very provocative. I don't think it was a navigational error. It was clearly intended to try to exacerbate tensions between our two allies. When the U.S. responded with sort of, an equal thing of both allies should resolve this, because South Korea, well, actually both countries claim sovereignty, it again, in a way, exacerbated the issue. So what we need to do is focus on supporting our allies against outside incursions rather than sort of, exacerbating the sovereignty issue between the two allies.
And is there a way of resolving it? Because I think you could say that at least on the military side, Japan and South Korea, aside from that regrettable, to use regional parlance, incident of the lock-on, there has been some very seamless cooperation between the two when it's come to instances like this in the future, and their mutual aid is.
Right. Well, one of the reasons many of us are concerned that the current iteration of the Japanese-South Korean dispute is worse than ever is because in the past, the economic and security realms seem to be walled off. And they not only were not included, but they were really a moderating factor. Now with all the export control issues, that's broken into the economic aspect, and you have boycotts, et cetera. And the security realm with the flyby incident that sort of broached the security area. Since then, the security side has been quiet, but now we have the South Koreans announcing they may resume maritime exercises off the disputed islands, really, which is directed against Japan. So, really, I think the officials and the officers from the two militaries understand the need to coordinate, but it's always, in a way, been done behind the scenes, because if it became known how much they were cooperating, then one public or the other might rebel against that. So it's something we need to get the security side back on track. We need to prevent either side pulling out of what's called the GSOMIA, the agreement which controls the control of and exchange of military and intelligence information.
Let me ask you one follow-up question, because you mentioned this earlier about the new Korean missile, not on a parabolic path, much flatter trajectory that's harder to intercept, and also a maneuvering warhead. Is there what should we be doing to better integrate, or what should South Korea do? Because the United States and Japan are very, very tightly integrated into an air defense network, whereas South Korea, oddly enough, despite decades, is not. What should the next step be there, given that this is a very, very potent and very dangerous threat from North Korea?
Well, I think even before this new KN-23 missile, I've always pushed for South Korea to integrate its missile defense system into the broader, more effective allied system. In a way, it's like having three outfielders talking to each other. You each have a different perspective of the outcoming fly ball or missile, and therefore, if you're talking to each other and you have it integrated digitally, then you're more likely to catch the ball or intercept the missile. But South Korea has always refused, really because of the historic disputes with Japan. Now with this new missile, it has new characteristics that make it more difficult to intercept, so we need to have a lot of technical focus on this, not only by U.S. experts, but also our allies, Japan, South Korea, as well as other allies who may have expertise on defending against this system.
Bruce Klingner of the Heritage Foundation, one of the true great experts on North Korea and on Asia. And how are you going to do? Are you guys going to beat the interns at the softball game today?
Well, I hope so, but I'm envisioning a much higher percentage of pulled muscles on the staff side than the young interns.
Break a leg and look forward to a full
don't
update.
say break
Thanks.
a leg.
Yeah, that's right.
Exactly what we may do.
I'm just kidding. Yeah. Thanks very much. Appreciate it, Bruce.
Great. Thanks.